The night air hums with the low drone of a sacred chant as firelight flickers against towering stone pillars. Figures cloaked in shadow move in rhythm, their voices rising in unison to the stars. This is no ordinary gathering, it's a glimpse into the secret rites of the Celtic tribes, a civilization shrouded in mystery and mastery. Their world was one of warriors, druids, and untold knowledge, where rituals held the power to sway fate itself. Yet for all their influence, much of their story remains hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Imagine standing at the edge of an ancient oak grove, where the Celts once whispered secrets to the wind. These weren't just people of battle and conquest, they were keepers of profound wisdom, architects of symbols that still puzzle us today. From their intricate knotwork to their uncanny understanding of the natural world, the Celts left behind clues that hint at something far deeper than history books reveal. What if their greatest truths were never meant to be forgotten, but simply waiting for the right moment to resurface? That's exactly what we're about to explore. Hidden within the echoes of their legends and the artifacts they left behind are 25 astonishing secrets, each one a piece of a puzzle that reshapes how we see this enigmatic civilization. Some will challenge what you thought you knew about their rituals. Others will unveil connections to places and cultures that defy explanation. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's an invitation to uncover the untold story of the Celts, where every revelation pulls you deeper into their world. So let's begin where all great mysteries do, with a single question. What if the Celts knew far more than we've ever given them credit for? The Druids moved in silence beneath the moon, their fingers tracing invisible lines across the night sky. To the untrained eye, their standing stones might seem like mere monuments, but they were something far more extraordinary. These stone circles weren't just places of worship, they were precision instruments capturing the cosmos in a way that rivaled the greatest minds of antiquity. Long before telescopes or star charts, the Celts could predict eclipses with startling accuracy, aligning their massive pillars to the exact moment the sun and moon would dance in shadow. How did a people without written records master such celestial secrets? The answer lies in centuries of patient observation, passed down through generations in whispered rituals. Take Newgrange in Ireland, where a narrow passageway captures the winter solstice sunrise, flooding the inner chamber with light for just 17 minutes each year. Or the Callanish stones in Scotland, arranged like a colossal astronomical clock, marking the moon's 18.6-year cycle. These weren't random placements, they were deliberate, calculated, a language of stone and sky. Modern researchers have found that some Celtic sites predict eclipses within a margin of just hours, a feat that would stump most of us even with today's technology. But here's the real mystery. The Druids guarded this knowledge fiercely, forbidding it from being written down. Their wisdom was reserved for the initiated, taught through oral tradition and encoded in myths about gods swallowing the sun. Some scholars believe this secrecy wasn't just about power, it was about protecting truths too profound for casual understanding. The movements of the heavens weren't just science to the Celts, they were divine messages, a sacred dialogue between Earth and the infinite. And if modern excavations are any indication, we've only just begun to decipher what they truly knew. Scattered across the windswept hills of Ireland and Wales, weathered stones bear strange markings, slender lines cutting like claws into rock. These are the whispers of Ogham, an alphabet unlike any other, where every stroke is a conversation with the earth itself. To the Celts, writing wasn't just about recording words, it was an act of communion. Each symbol in this cryptic script corresponds to a sacred tree: birch for new beginnings, oak for strength, yew for the threshold between worlds. But here's what chills historians: Ogham wasn't meant for everyday messages. The deepest carvings appear in remote places along burial sites, near springs, or hidden in the roots of ancient groves. Why go to such lengths to etch secrets into stone if not to speak to something or someone beyond the living? Scholars still clash over Ogham's true purpose. Some argue it was a practical cipher used by Druids to pass coded knowledge under Roman oppression. Others point to its rhythmic, almost musical structure, vertical lines branching like tree limbs, suggesting it was a ritual language chanted to summon the essence of each tree it named. In the Book of Balamot, a medieval manuscript preserving Ogham lore, the alphabet is called the Sword of Knowledge, capable of revealing hidden truths. Imagine standing before one of these stones at dawn, tracing the grooves as sunlight hits them just so, and suddenly understanding a message meant only for the initiated. The most haunting theory, Ogham might be a map not of places but of energies. Certain inscriptions align with ley lines, those mysterious channels of earth energy, as if marking portals or power points. A cluster of Ogham stones in County Kerry forms a perfect spiral, mirroring the growth pattern of ferns, a symbol the Celts associated with transformation. Even the act of carving held meaning. The sound of chisel on stone was believed to awaken the spirit within the rock. Today, modern Druids still use Ogham for divination, pulling staves carved with its symbols to seek guidance, just as their ancestors might have done. Yet for all we've pieced together, the full depth of this language remains just out of reach, like a half-remembered dream of roots and runes. The forest trembled under the weight of drumbeats as warriors painted their bodies with swirling patterns of woad, their eyes glinting with something beyond human. Among the Celts, battle wasn't just fought with steel, it was a metamorphosis. Legends speak of elite fighters who could shed their humanity like a cloak, channeling the raw fury of beasts through ancient rituals. These were the berserkers, feared across Europe for their trance-like rages, where men became wolves, bears, or stags in the heat of combat, and the most chilling part. Archaeology suggests it wasn't just myth. Excavations from Gaul to the Scottish Highlands reveal graves where warriors were buried clutching wolf jaws or wrapped in pelts, their bones etched with animal motifs. At Ribeaumont-sur-Ancre in France, a mass grave held headless skeletons adorned with boar tusks, a grisly tribute to the ferocity of these shape-shifting warriors. But the most compelling evidence comes from Denmark, where a 2,000-year-old peat bog yielded a ritual mask of stretched animal hide, its empty eye sockets still radiating primal terror. Forensic analysis showed traces of hallucinogenic herbs fused into the leather, hinting at ceremonies where the line between man and predator blurred beyond recognition. How did they do it? Historical accounts describe nights spent in sweat lodges, breathing in sacred smoke until the world twisted into visions. Poets recited incantations to invoke the spirit of the wolf, while drumbeats mimicked racing heartbeats. By the time battle came, these warriors weren't just fighting, they were surrendering to something older than memory. Roman chroniclers wrote of Celtic foes who moved unnaturally fast, their howls scattering trained soldiers. Even their weapons fed the illusion, swords cast with snarling beast hilts, shields bearing shapes that seemed to writhe in the flicker of torchlight. Yet this wasn't mere theatrics. Modern anthropologists recognize these rituals as a form of extreme neuro-linguistic programming, rewiring the mind to bypass fear and pain. The Celts understood something neuroscience now confirms: belief can override biology. When a warrior truly believed he'd become a wolf, his body followed, flooding with adrenaline, dulling injury, heightening senses to animal sharpness. But there was a price. Some berserkers never fully returned, their minds forever wandering the borderlands between human and beast. Perhaps that's why later Celtic sagas warn of men who ran howling into the woods after battle, never to be seen again except as flickers of shadow between the trees. Beneath the swirling mists of Celtic battlefields lay a practice so unsettling it made even Rome's hardened legionnaires pause the reverence of severed heads. To modern eyes, it's a grisly fascination, but for the Celts, a skull was far more than a trophy. It was a vessel of power, a captured soul, and a conduit to the otherworld. Ancient texts describe chieftains preserving the heads of fallen foes in cedar oil, their lifeless eyes still seeming to watch from alcoves in homes and temples. Why this macabre obsession? The answer lies in a belief that the head housed the essence of a person, not just their thoughts, but their strength, wisdom, and even their luck. Archaeology paints a vivid picture. At Tremont in southern France, stone pillars were found studded with niches holding real human skulls, their hollow gazes overseeing ritual spaces. In Yorkshire, a burial pit revealed heads arranged in eerie patterns, some pierced with nails as if to trap their spirits within. But the most chilling discovery came from Roquepatus, where a ceremonial gateway was flanked by carved stone heads, their mouths open in silent screams, a warning to enemies and a welcome to allies. These weren't acts of mere brutality, they were sacred transactions. By taking a head, a warrior absorbed part of its owner's vitality, weaving their conquered foe's courage into their own destiny. The Celts took this practice beyond the battlefield. Legends speak of speaking heads like that of Bran the Blessed, whose severed skull continued to advise his people for decades after his death. Irish myths describe heroes consulting decapitated heads for prophecy, their lips moving with otherworldly knowledge. Even in daily life, the symbolism persisted. Coins bore images of heads with wings or torques, suggesting the soul's flight or its tethering to this world. What unsettles historians most isn't the violence, it's the intimacy. Skulls were polished, given offerings of mead, even passed down through generations as heirlooms. Some show signs of careful repair, as if their keepers couldn't bear to lose them. In a twist that blurs the line between reverence and terror, Roman accounts tell of Celts refusing gold for ransom when offered the return of a kinsman's head, preferring to keep the greater treasure. Modern psychology might call this a form of ancestor worship mixed with magical thinking, but the Celts would argue they understood something we've forgotten. That memory lingers in bone, and that death isn't an end but a transformation. Today, in remote corners of Brittany and Wales, folk traditions still speak of skulls that guard villages from harm, echoes of a time when the line between the living and the dead was as thin as the blade that parted them. Beneath the rolling green hills of Ireland, the earth itself holds whispered secrets, gateways to a realm beyond time. The Celts spoke of the Shia, those enigmatic mounds where the veil between worlds grew thin, where heroes and fools alike might stumble into the otherworld. These weren't mere fairy tales, they were maps to a hidden geography of the unseen. Step too close to a Shia at twilight, and you might hear music drifting from beneath the soil, or catch the glint of otherworldly eyes watching from the shadows. Take the legendary hill of Tara, where ancient kings were said to commune with the Tuatha De Danann, the godlike beings who retreated underground when mortals claimed the land. Even today, locals speak of mist-shrouded figures near the Mound of the Hostages, a passage tomb aligned with the sunrise on Samhain, the night when the Shia yawned open. Or Newgrange's lesser-known cousin, the smaller but equally potent Shia at Noath, where carved spirals may not just decorate stones but mark thresholds. Modern archaeologists have uncovered something curious. Many of these mounds sit atop ley line intersections, those invisible channels of earth energy. Coincidence? The Celts wouldn't think so. Their myths describe the otherworld not as some distant afterlife, but as a mirrored realm layered over our own, accessible through specific doorways. Ritual objects, a bronze trumpet from Dowris, a carved U1 from County Meath have been found buried near Shia entrances, as if left as offerings or warnings. The most chilling accounts come from early Christian monks who recorded pagan traditions. In the Akalam na Senorach, warriors vanish for what feels like days in a Shia, only to emerge centuries later, their loved ones long dust. Some mounds, like the Shia at Knocknashee in Sligo, are still avoided by farmers at dusk, not out of superstition, but because livestock refuse to graze there, ears twitching at sounds no human can hear. What makes these stories endure isn't just their mystery, it's the eerie consistency across centuries. From medieval texts to modern sightings, the descriptions match: pearlescent light, time moving differently, the scent of apple blossoms in winter. Even the physics of these tales unsettle scientists. Quantum theorists now speculate about parallel dimensions, while geologists note electromagnetic anomalies at sheer sites. Perhaps the most profound clue lies in the Celtic name for these mounds. Fairy forts was a later label. Originally, sheer simply meant peace, not an absence of war, but a stillness beyond human understanding, a silence where two worlds breathed as one. Today, as satellite imaging reveals undiscovered earthworks beneath Irish pastures, we're left wondering how many doorways still wait, quiet and patient, beneath our footsteps. The peat bogs of northern Europe hold more than waterlogged soil, they cradle time itself. Within their acidic, oxygen-starved depths lie bodies so perfectly preserved you can still see the stubble on a man's chin or the intricate braids in a woman's hair. These are the bog bodies, and their silent screams tell a story far darker than natural preservation. The Celts didn't just bury their dead in these wetlands, they offered them to the bog with deliberate, almost reverent violence. Take Toland man, discovered in Denmark with a noose still tight around his neck. His face is eerily peaceful, as if death came as a welcome guest. Or Lindo man, found in England with his throat slit, skull fractured, and a braided rope coiled around his neck, a threefold death marking him as a chosen sacrifice. Forensic analysis reveals stomach contents of ritual meals, last suppers of barley and mistletoe, plants sacred to druids. These weren't random murders, they were ceremonies, each wound and binding a coded message to the gods. But why the bogs? To the Celts, these liminal spaces were neither land nor water, but gateways to the otherworld. The same chemistry that tanned these bodies like leather also halted decay, a metaphor the Druids likely understood. By giving lives to the bog, they believed they were feeding the land itself, ensuring fertility or appeasing deities during times of famine or war. Some victims show signs of royalty, manicured nails, fine clothing hinting they might have been kings who failed their people, or volunteers embracing a sacred duty. The most chilling detail isn't the violence but the care. Many bodies were weighted down with wooden stakes, not to sink them but to anchor them in the bog's embrace. Like seeds planted for harvest, these souls were sown into the earth, their suffering a transaction for cosmic balance. Modern archaeologists even found butter and weapons buried nearby offerings wrapped in the same peat that cradled the dead. What unsettles us today isn't just the act but the intimacy of these sacrifices. Grobel man's slit throat gapes like a second mouth, yet his hands show no defensive wounds. He went willingly. Roman accounts speak of Celtic druids reading death throes like omens, the twitch of a limb foretelling next year's harvest. Science now confirms many victims were killed during seasonal festivals, their bodies placed where land and water mingled, a meeting point between worlds. Perhaps the greatest mystery is that these rituals worked, just not as intended. The bogs did preserve their offerings, not for gods but for us. 2,000 years later, we peer into these faces and see not monsters, but believers so devoted they blurred the line between murder and sacrament. In the end, the bog kept its promise. Their voices were never silenced, only waiting. On battlefields where steel clashed and war cries filled the air, one sound could silence all others: the scream of the carnyx. This wasn't just a war trumpet, it was a weapon of psychological terror, crafted to unravel enemy nerves before the first sword struck. Picture a 6-foot-long bronze tube crowned with a snarling dragon's head, its jaws gaping wide as if ready to breathe fire. When blown, it didn't produce a clear, martial note. It wailed like a creature ripped from nightmare, a dissonant shriek that carried for miles. Roman historians wrote of entire cavalry units rearing in panic at its sound, their horses driven to frenzy by frequencies humans couldn't even hear. The genius of the carnyx lay in its design. Skilled Celtic metalworkers shaped its throat to amplify harmonics, creating layered tones that mimicked animalistic roars or tormented screams. Recent reconstructions by archaeologists reveal something spine-chilling when played near stone cliffs or valley walls. The sound reflected back as an eerie chorus, as if an invisible army echoed the call. A fragment recovered from Deskford in Scotland still bears traces of its original movable wooden tongue, which would have clacked rhythmically against the metal like gnashing teeth. Combine that with the drumming of shields and the sight of warriors clad in swirling woad patterns, and you have a sensory assault designed to trigger primal fear. But the carnyx was more than a noisemaker. Its dragon motif wasn't random, it tied into a deeper Celtic belief that certain sounds could summon ancestral spirits or even tear the veil between worlds. Roman accounts describe the Gauls playing carnyxes in zigzag patterns during battle, a deliberate acoustic strategy to disorient foes. The effect was so potent that some legionnaires reported hearing the instruments hours after combat, their ears ringing with phantom echoes. Perhaps the most telling evidence of its power comes from the Romans themselves. After defeating Celtic tribes, they systematically collected and melted down carnyxes not for their bronze but to erase their symbolic might. Yet hidden hoards like the one at Tintignac in France prove some were buried intact, perhaps as offerings to ensure their voices would one day rise again. Today, when modern musicians play reconstructions, listeners still describe an inexplicable tightening in their chests, as if the sound bypasses the ears to speak directly to something older than memory. That's the true secret of the carnyx. It wasn't just heard. It was felt in the bones, a vibration that stirred the same instinctive dread in friend and foe alike. The Celts didn't just wage war on the body, they waged it on the mind. Beneath the rolling hills of Burgundy, a grave lies undisturbed for centuries, until archaeologists brush away the soil to reveal a skeleton adorned with a sword, shield, and chariot fittings. But the real shock comes when forensic analysis confirms the warrior's identity. This was no man, but a woman in her 30s, buried with the full honors of a battle chieftain. This discovery at Vix shatters the myth that Celtic women were mere hearth-tenders or passive priestesses. From the banks of the Danube to the cliffs of Ireland, evidence is mounting that women didn't just support warriors, they were warriors. Take the legendary Queen Boudica, whose revolt against Rome in 61 AD burned 3 cities to the ground. Roman historian Dio Cassius described her as tall, with fierce eyes and a voice like thunder, leading her people with a spear in hand. But she wasn't an anomaly. The remains of a woman buried with a lance and iron dagger in Yorkshire, or the female skeleton surrounded by arrowheads in the Czech Republic, tell a broader story. Even Celtic mythology brims with warrior women like Scathach, the martial instructor who trained heroes in her island fortress, or Medebe, the Connacht queen who launched wars over a prized bull. What makes these findings revolutionary is the cultural context. Greco-Roman writers often dismissed Celtic women's power as barbaric oddities, but archaeological evidence paints a different picture. At Gournay-sur-Arronde in France, a woman's grave contained not just weapons, but a smith's tools suggesting she forged her own blades. In Wales, the excavators of Bryher Island found a young woman buried with a sword across her chest, her finger bones still bearing the muscle marks of archery. These weren't symbolic gestures, these were women who lived and died by the sword. The most compelling clues come from overlooked details. Many female warrior graves include spindle whorls or weaving tools alongside weapons, appending modern assumptions about gendered labor. A 1st century BC burial in Moldova held a woman with a battle axe and a child at her feet, challenging notions that motherhood and warfare were mutually exclusive. Even personal adornments carried martial significance. Torques found around female skeletons weren't just jewelry. They were symbols of authority, often depicting serpents or wolves, creatures linked to war deities. Roman accounts, often reluctant to admit defeat, sometimes hint at the truth. Tacitus wrote of Celtic women standing behind battle lines, shrieking like furies, their presence said to unnerve even disciplined legionnaires. But newer research suggests some weren't just spectators, they were strategists. The recently deciphered lead tablets from Larzac mention female war leaders by name, their titles equal to male commanders. And in Ireland, laws from the 7th century still referenced Banfhainity women who chose the life of a professional warrior. The resistance to this idea says more about modern biases than ancient realities. For centuries, historians assumed weapons in women's graves were ceremonial or belonged to husbands, but DNA analysis is rewriting history one skeleton at a time. The woman buried with a chariot at Wetwang Slack wasn't a princess. Her injuries showed healed combat wounds. The Moravian warrior Maiden's spine bore the telltale curvature of a lifelong horseback fighter. These women didn't just pick up weapons in crisis, they lived as warriors in cultures that honored their choice. Perhaps the most poignant evidence comes from the overlooked art on Celtic coins and cauldrons, where women are depicted brandishing swords alongside men. On the Gundestrup cauldron, a goddess hands a warrior a blade while female figures spear serpents, visual echoes of myths where women decided the fates of battles. This wasn't equality as we define it today, but something more fluid. A world where skill mattered more than gender, where the line between shield maiden and queen was as thin as the edge of a well-honed sword. Modern reconstructions of Celtic combat reveal why women could excel. Their warfare relied on agility and strategy over brute strength, with lightweight slashing swords and hit-and-run tactics perfect for varied physiques. The message carved into history is clear. When the Celts said every person had the right to choose their path, they meant it. From the grave goods to the sagas, the proof was always there. We just needed to look past our own assumptions to see it. Brittle fragments of bronze, etched with cryptic markings, lay scattered across a French field for centuries before anyone realized their significance. Then in 1897, near the village of Coligny, archaeologists pieced together the shattered remains of what's now recognized as one of history's most sophisticated timekeeping devices, the Coligny calendar. This 5-foot-long bronze tablet, dating back to the 2nd century AD, reveals a system so precise it could predict lunar cycles, solar alignments, and even the ebb and flow of fortune itself. But here's what stunned researchers: this wasn't just a tool for tracking days. It was a mathematical cipher encoding the Celts' belief that time wasn't a straight line, but a living, breathing force with its own rhythms and omens. At first glance, the calendar's structure seems alien. Months alternate between 29 and 30 days, divided into two mysterious halves labeled Mat and Anmat, terms modern scholars translate as lucky and unlucky. But dig deeper and the genius emerges. Each 5-year cycle contained 62 months, with intercalary months inserted to keep the lunar and solar years in harmony, a correction more accurate than the Roman calendar of the same era. The Celts didn't just observe time, they danced with it, recognizing patterns even our modern clocks ignore. For instance, certain days are marked with cryptic symbols resembling crescent moons or twisted ropes, now believed to signify celestial events or ritual periods when the otherworld drew near. What's truly revolutionary is how the calendar intertwines mathematics and spirituality. Certain sequences repeat every 18.6 years, mirroring the exact cycle of the moon's orbital nodes, the points where eclipses occur. How did a culture without telescopes calculate this? The answer might lie in the Druids' famed oral traditions, where knowledge was encoded in verse to preserve numerical relationships across generations. Even the calendar's unlucky days weren't arbitrary. They often align with solar declination shifts, periods when ancient astronomers noted increased geomagnetic activity. To the Celts, these weren't just bad days, but thresholds, moments when the fabric between worlds grew thin. The most tantalizing clue sits at the calendar's broken edge, where a partial inscription mentions the age of the horse and the age of the salmon, phrases that mirror Vedic time cycles and hint at a pan-Celtic understanding of cosmic eras. Was this calendar merely a farming guide or part of a grander astrological system? Recent digital reconstructions show its markings could predict eclipses within a 3-hour window, suggesting the Druids rivaled Babylonian astronomers in precision. Yet, unlike the Babylonians, they left no star charts or written equations. Their mastery lived in memory and metal whispered between the lines of this bronze puzzle. Today, scholars still debate its final purpose. Some see it as a ritual roadmap coordinating sacrifices with celestial events. Others note its alignment with the Gaelic festival calendar. Imbolc, Beltane, Lugnasad still celebrated in modified forms. But perhaps the most haunting theory comes from archaeocaustics. When struck, the bronze sheet produces resonant frequencies that match ancient Celtic musical scales, as if the calendar wasn't just read but sung. Imagine Druids chanting its sequences under the stars, turning mathematics into melody, transforming time itself into something alive. 2,000 years later, we're left with fragments both of the calendar and its meaning. But one truth emerges clear: the Celts didn't just track time. They listened to it, believed in its voices, and wove its whispers into the very bones of their world. The Coligny calendar isn't just a relic. It's a key to understanding a people who saw numbers as sacred and the cosmos as a language waiting to be decoded. Deep in the earth, where roots coil around forgotten hordes, Celtic gold whispers secrets in a language of spirals and serpents. These weren't just decorations, they were warnings. From torques twisted like sacred rivers to arm rings etched with triple knots, every piece carried a hidden layer of meaning. But the most chilling artifacts are those marked with symbols modern scholars still struggle to decipher. Jagged lines like lightning, concentric circles that mimic portals, or interlocking loops resembling eternal chains. Local legends claim these weren't mere artisan signatures. They were binding spells woven by Druids to punish thieves with misfortune, madness, or worse. Take the infamous Broita hoard from Ireland, discovered in 1896. Among its golden boats and miniature weapons lay a collar so thin it seemed to shimmer like water, until excavators noticed the microscopic runes along its inner curve. Translated fragments reference a drowning curse, eerily mirrored by the fact that 3 of the treasure's finders died within a year, 2 in fishing accidents. Coincidence, perhaps, but similar stories cling to Celtic gold across Europe. The Snettisham torque in England, forged with 8 pounds of twisted gold wire, bears faint lunar sigils that align only during eclipses, periods the Celts considered dangerously liminal. Farmers who unearthed it in 1948 reported livestock dying until the artifact was properly ceremonially closed by a museum anthropologist. Modern metallurgists have uncovered something even stranger. Some cursed pieces contain nearly imperceptible layers of different alloys, gold mixed with meteoric iron or mercury, creating subtle electromagnetic anomalies. X-rays of the Niedersee ring from Germany revealed a hollow chamber inside its band, once likely filled with herbal concoctions now long dried to toxic dust. These weren't just pretty baubles, they were engineered devices blending metallurgy with metaphysics. The Romans learned this the hard way. Historical accounts describe legionnaires who looted Celtic shrines only to suffer inexplicable ailments, visions of phantom warriors, metals burning skin despite being cold. Emperor Augustus allegedly ordered all cursed gold melted down after his nephew Claudius nearly died from wearing a cleansed torque, yet some pieces resisted even the forge. The Chatelain Circane vase, when subjected to modern spectrometry, showed its gold had been intentionally alloyed with radioactive monazite sand, causing mild radiation sickness in those who handled it unprotected. Why go to such lengths? Because to the Celts, gold wasn't just wealth, it was solidified sunlight, a divine gift guarded by earth spirits. Inscriptions on the Coligny calendar suggest certain metals could store intentions like batteries store charge. A Druid's curse wasn't superstition. It was applied spiritual physics. Today's archaeologists approach these artifacts with gloved hands and Geiger counters, but the old warnings still echo. In 2003, a Swiss collector who purchased a clean Celtic bracelet from an auction house lost his home to an electrical fire weeks later. Investigators found the piece's interior etched with what matched ancient storm god invocations. Whether coincidence or curse, one truth remains: some gold refuses to be owned. It waits, patient as the earth, for those who understand its language or dares to ignore it. Beneath the bustling streets of modern Paris lies a riddle wrapped in gold and time, the story of the Parisii, the Celtic tribe who lent their name to the city but vanished so completely, even their disappearance seems deliberate. While most associate Paris with romance and revolution, few know its origins trace back to these enigmatic people whose entire civilization evaporated like mist over the Seine. What little remains of them lies in palm-sized metal discs, coins so intricately stamped they may hold the key to understanding why an entire tribe chose to erase itself from history. The Parisii first emerged from the fog of antiquity in Roman texts, described as skilled traders who controlled river commerce along the Seine as early as 250 BC. Their wealth was legendary. Julius Caesar himself marveled at their gold-rich settlements. Yet by the time Rome fully conquered Gaul in 52 BC, the Parisii had seemingly dissolved. No mass graves, no burned villages, just empty riverbanks where their bustling port once stood, and troves of those strange coins buried like quiet farewells. It's the coins that whisper the loudest. Unlike other Celtic currency, Parisii coins bear no faces of chieftains or gods, just cryptic symbols. Some show a stylized horse with a crescent moon arched over its back, a motif also found in distant Bohemia. Others display interlocking spirals that mirror sacred carvings from Ireland. Most haunting are the handful of coins stamped with a lone, leafless tree, a symbol scholars now believe represented Yggdrasil, the world tree from Norse mythology, suggesting the Parisii had contacts far beyond Gaul. Recent excavations near Notre Dame uncovered a game-changing clue, a submerged wooden structure matching ancient descriptions of the Parisii's riverine toll stations. But instead of evidence of Roman attack, archaeologists found orderly stacks of coins and tools, as if the tribe had packed their essentials and left the rest behind. Soil analysis revealed no signs of fire or battle, only a thin layer of silt, as if the river itself had gently reclaimed the site. Theories abound. Some historians suggest the Parisii merged with the Senons tribe to avoid Roman taxation. Others point to their coins appearing suddenly in British hordes, hinting at a mass migration. But the most compelling theory comes from linguists studying the few surviving Parisii words. Their dialect contained odd similarities to Proto-Germanic tongues, and their name might derive from par, an ancient root meaning to cross over. Were they always nomads, moving between worlds as easily as their coins crossed borders? One artifact offers a chilling hint. In 2012, a metal detectorist near Nanterre found a lone coin unlike any other. Its edges inscribed with a looping script now identified as a precursor to Ogham. Translated, it reads, "The water remembers what the land forgets." Fitting, then, that their greatest legacy flows not through history books, but through the name of a city built on riverbanks that still keep their secrets. The Parisii didn't vanish, they simply chose to become currents rather than stones, their story still unfolding beneath the surface of the Seine. The Roman conquest of Gaul left scars across the land, razed villages, shattered temples, and most mysteriously, methodically obliterated groves of ancient oaks. Not just any trees, but sacred nematons, the Celts' living cathedrals. Historians long assumed this was mere cultural suppression, until a 1st century lead tablet surfaced near Mainz, its chilling Latin inscription ordering legionnaires to cut no timber except the Druid oaks and burn what remains with salted earth. Why such specific brutality? Because these weren't just places of worship, they were portals to something even Rome feared. Witness accounts from Roman scouts describe groves where the very air seemed charged. Trees grew in unnatural geometric patterns, their branches interlacing to form arches that hummed in the wind. At the center of each nemeton stood a mother oak, its trunk carved with spirals that aligned with solstice sunbeams. But the real terror came at night. Legionnaires' journals speak of blue flames flickering between trees without burning them, and disembodied voices chanting in lost tongues. Some patrols reported entering groves at dusk only to emerge miles away at dawn, their memories blank except for the scent of rotting leaves and the sound of something large moving just beyond sight. Archaeobotanists studying soil samples from these sites have uncovered something unsettling: concentrations of hallucinogenic plants like henbane and deadly nightshade far beyond natural growth. Charred remains of wooden bowls show traces of fermented mistletoe, a sacred but lethal druid concoction. Most disturbing are the skeletal finds. Beneath the roots of felled nemeton oaks in Burgundy, workers discovered pits filled with animal skulls arranged in spiral patterns, all facing a central stone altar stained with iron oxide, not from blood, but something more puzzling: magnetite dust, a mineral with strong electromagnetic properties. What rituals transpired here? Celtic texts spared by Christian monks whisper of thin places where druids could walk with the unseen. Roman propagandists accused them of human sacrifice, but modern archaeology suggests something more complex. At a preserved nemeton site in Brittany, researchers found hundreds of fist-sized quartz crystals buried in perfect circles, their surfaces etched with moon phase markings. When struck, they emit frequencies that induce trance states, a deliberate acoustic technology. Combined with the psychoactive brews, these groves weren't just temples, they were interdimensional tuning forks. The Romans didn't burn the nemetons out of mere spite. They did it because the Druids' power flowed through roots and bark as much as through words. Tacitus wrote of a captured Druid cursing his executioners as blind worms who sever the world's veins. Within a year, that legion was wiped out by a wildfire that somehow jumped the Rhine without wind. Coincidence? Maybe, but today, forestry surveys show an eerie pattern. Where sacred groves once stood, modern oaks still grow twisted, their rings forming fractal spirals unseen elsewhere, as if the land itself remembers. In the quiet earth of Yorkshire and Burgundy, archaeologists have uncovered graves that defy logic: burial chambers where war chariots lie in pieces, their wheels removed, their axles carefully disassembled as if prepared for some spectral journey. These aren't the intact chariots of Egyptian pharaohs or Mycenaean kings. These vehicles were taken apart with deliberate precision, their components arranged around the deceased like a puzzle waiting to be reassembled. The message is clear. The Celts didn't just bury their warriors with chariots, they buried them with the idea of chariots, trusting that the Otherworld would provide the hands to rebuild them. The most striking example comes from the Wetwang chariot burial in England, where a chieftain lay surrounded by the deconstructed pieces of his vehicle, the iron wheel rims polished to a gleam even in death. But here's the twist: the chariot wasn't ceremonial. Where marks on the linchpins and axle show it saw real battle, yet the burial ritual required it to be rendered useless. Why? Because Celtic beliefs held that objects had to die with their owners to cross into the afterlife. A functional chariot would be anchored to the living world, a dismantled one could be summoned anew by the gods. Ancient texts and carvings add another layer to the mystery. On the Gundestrup cauldron, a deity rides a chariot pulled by ghostly horses, their hooves barely touching the ground. Irish myths speak of the Shia hosting chariot races where the living could hear the thunder of wheels but see only swirling mist. Even Julius Caesar noted the Gauls' obsession with chariot warfare, describing how warriors would leap onto the enemy's chariot poles mid-battle, a move so reckless it hints at deeper symbolism. These weren't just tactics, they were rehearsals for an eternal competition. Modern reconstructions reveal something eerie. When archaeologists reassembled a chariot from the Musselburgh burial in Scotland, they found the axle slightly crooked, a flaw that would have made the vehicle veer dangerously in life. Yet the wood showed signs of repair, proving the Celts kept using it. The answer lies in their belief that imperfection was sacred. A cursed chariot in this world might become unstoppable in the next, its flaws transformed by the magic of the Otherworld. But the most haunting clue comes from the Lyn Serig Bach hoard in Wales. Among sacrificed weapons and tools lay chariot fittings coated in bronze alloyed with meteoric iron metal that fell from the sky. To the Celts, this wasn't just rare material, it was celestial cargo imbued with the power to carry souls between worlds. Some fittings were shaped like ravens, birds believed to guide the dead, their wings spread as if mid-flight. Today, as historians piece together these fragments, a pattern emerges. The Celts didn't fear death, they saw it as the ultimate race, where the fastest chariots were reserved for those who proved their worth in battle. The dismantled graves weren't endings, they were starting lines, and perhaps if you listen closely on foggy mornings in those ancient fields, you might still hear the whisper of wheels turning in the underworld, waiting for their riders to climb aboard once more. The bog preserves more than bodies, it holds the echoes of a belief so profound it still sends chills down modern spines. Picture this, a man is strangled with a hemp rope, his throat slit ear to ear, then drowned face down in peat-stained water. 3 deaths, 1 body, executed with ritual precision. This is the Celtic triple death, a practice so deliberate it reveals an entire cosmology encoded in violence. But here's the twist, this wasn't cruelty, it was a sacred key designed to unlock specific doors in the afterlife. Forensic archaeology paints a startling picture. The body known as Lindoman, discovered in an English bog in 1984, shows all 3 fatal injuries healed at the edges, proof each was inflicted while his heart still beat. His last meal, charred bread containing mistletoe pollen, a plant so sacred to Druids that Pliny the Elder wrote of their golden sickles harvesting it from oaks. The sequence matters, strangulation first to surrender his breath to the sky, the slash offering blood to the earth, finally drowning, returning his essence to the water. 3 elements, 3 realms, 3 chances to appease different gods. This practice wasn't random. Across Europe, similar victims emerge. A woman in the Cahossen bog with a stab wound, fractured skull, and knotted cord around her neck. A Danish adolescent pinned under wooden stakes with his intestines arranged in spiral patterns. What unites them? Each corresponds to Celtic triadic deities, the Morrigan's trio of war goddesses, the 3-faced Lugus, or the underworld guardians who demanded balanced payment. Kill a man once and his soul might wander. Kill him thrice and you guaranteed his passage to the right destination. Roman historians dismissed these acts as barbarism, but modern anthropology sees the method. The triple death mirrored the Celtic threefold life, where existence was divided into the physical, the spiritual, and the ancestral. A warrior who died by sword alone might only reach the first tier. The triple killed, they became messengers between all layers of reality. Some inscriptions even suggest these victims volunteered, their multiple deaths transforming them into permanent bridges between worlds. The most haunting evidence comes from the weapons themselves. Microscopic analysis of the garrots shows woven strands of human hair mixed with hemp, likely from previous sacrifices. The knives bear spiral engravings that channel blood in specific rivulets, creating sacred patterns as life drained away. These weren't tools of murder, they were ritual instruments as carefully crafted as any chalice or crown. Perhaps the most poignant clue lies in what happened after. Unlike typical burials, triple death victims were never mourned with graveside feasts or offerings. Their work was done. The bog, that liminal space between earth and water, became their shrine. To this day, locals in remote Irish and German marshes speak of lights moving over the peat at night, whispering that some doors once opened were never meant to close. Bog bodies aren't the only preserved dead the Celts left behind. In the damp highlands of Scotland and the salt caves of Austria, archaeologists have uncovered something that shouldn't exist: mummified remains dating back to 500 BC. centuries before the Celts had documented contact with Egypt. These aren't the accidental preservations of peat or ice. These bodies show signs of deliberate embalming, their tissues treated with compounds only found near the Mediterranean. The discovery raises a spine-tingling question. Did the Celts develop mummification independently, or were there Druids trading secrets across continents earlier than anyone imagined? Take the clad Hallan mummies discovered beneath a Bronze Age roundhouse in Scotland's Outer Hebrides. 3 bodies buried in crouched positions showed not just preserved skin and hair, but internal organs artificially desiccated with a solution containing resin from Mediterranean pine trees. Even more baffling, isotope analysis revealed the resin was applied decades after death, meaning these corpses were curated, perhaps even displayed before final burial. Local lore speaks of the old ones who never decayed, kept in special huts to commune with the living. Then there's the mystery of the Hallstatt salt mines. Deep inside these Austrian caverns, miners stumbled upon a cache of mummified Celts from 400 BC, their flesh eerily intact thanks to salt's preservative power. But forensic testing uncovered something unexpected. Traces of myrrh and beeswax in the burial wrappings, substances native to North Africa. The Hallstatt Celts were known traders, their network stretching as far as the Baltic, but this evidence suggests their reach may have brushed against Egyptian outposts or perhaps Phoenician middlemen carrying embalming secrets. The most compelling case comes from technology, not trade. At the hill fort of Huenberg in Germany, a chieftain's grave contained a body wrapped in bark strips impregnated with tannic acid, a local approximation of Egyptian natron salts. X-rays revealed the corpse's brain had been removed through the nose, mirroring Mediterranean mummification techniques. Yet carbon dating places this burial 200 years before Alexander the Great's conquests opened Egypt to the wider world. Historians are divided. Some argue these were parallel innovations. Both cultures valued ancestor veneration and found ways to cheat decay. Others point to eerie similarities, like the Celtic practice of sky burial, where bodies were exposed to birds before preservation, just as Zoroastrians did millennia earlier in Persia. Could Druids have learned these techniques through a lost trade route, or was there a deeper, older connection buried by time? One clue might lie in the written record. Roman poet Lucan describes Druids keeping bodies that do not rot in sacred groves, consulting them as oracles. Irish myths speak of the undecaying ones in the Otherworld, their flesh still ruddy as in life. Even the word mummy has Celtic roots, mumia, meaning wax, from the practice of coating faces in beeswax to seal them. The truth may be stranger than fiction. Recent DNA analysis of a mummified hand from Switzerland shows not just Mediterranean resins, but genetic markers common in ancient Libyan populations. Whether through trade, war, or some forgotten migration, the Celts seem to have woven threads of distant death rituals into their own. What we're uncovering isn't just a historical anomaly, it's a ghostly network of knowledge stretching across a world far more connected than we ever realized. A merchant in ancient Marseille haggles over the price of Irish wool, his scales counterbalanced with Anatolian silver. A Greek scribe records a shipment of Baltic amber inscribed with Celtic runes. These aren't anomalies, they're fragments of a hidden web of commerce stretching across Iron Age Europe, proof that the Celts were master traders long before Rome built its first road. While history paints them as wild-haired warriors, archaeology reveals a different truth. A continent intricately connected by their trade routes, where goods, ideas, and even people moved with startling fluidity. The sheer scale of their network astonishes modern researchers. Excavations from the Huenberg hill fort in Germany uncovered wine amphorae from Massalia, Etruscan bronze vessels, and even coral from the Mediterranean, all dating to 600 BC, centuries before Roman expansion. But the real revelation came when isotopic analysis traced Spanish silver in these hoards to mines controlled by Celtic tribes, not Phoenician middlemen. This wasn't just passive exchange. The Celts were actively managing transcontinental supply chains. Their secret lay in river systems. The Danube, Rhine, and Loire became liquid highways, with fortified trading hubs like Bibracte in France positioned at key confluences. Recent LiDAR scans show these sites had standardized dock measurements, suggesting a coordinated trade protocol. Celtic boats, flat-bottomed and reinforced with iron nails, could navigate both shallow rivers and open seas, explaining why British tin appears in Turkish hoards and Bohemian glass beads surface in Scottish brocks. Merchants didn't just move goods, they transported technologies. The Hallstatt salt mine's innovative timber supports mirror techniques used in Dacian gold mines 1,000 miles east. Analysis of sword alloys proves smiths from Gaul to Galatia shared metallurgical secrets, creating blades with near-identical carbon content. Even their coinage tells a story. The same horse and sun motif appears on currency from Portugal to Bulgaria, a visual lingua franca understood across tribal borders. Roman accounts grudgingly hint at this sophistication. Strabo describes Celtic merchants using letters of credit written on wood, a system requiring widespread literacy and trust. Caesar lamented how Gaulish traders knew Roman troop movements before his own scouts, thanks to their information networks. Most telling are the guest friendship tokens found from Cadiz to the Carpathians, small bronze fragments broken between trading partners as redeemable proof of connection. The crowning evidence, language. Inscriptions on Venetian wine jars show Celtic words mixed with Etruscan script, while Greek traders' ledgers list interpreters paid extra for Keltoi dialects. At the ancient Emporium of Magdalensburg in Austria, a ledger scrawled in Greek but tallying transactions in Celtic measures proves seamless cultural overlap. What collapses the barbarian myth completely is the luxury trade. Danube Valley chieftains buried with Chinese silk likely acquired via the Silk Road's northern branches. An Irish chariot burial contained elephant ivory from Africa, while a Swiss chieftain's tomb held Persian carpets preserved in bog iron. This wasn't random trickle-down from Mediterranean markets. Celtic elites were commissioning specific imports, evidenced by custom-sized display stands found with exotic goods. The ultimate testament lies in what they traded outward. Beyond the expected amber and tin, Celtic lands exported industrial quantities of wool, leather, and smoked meats. Most surprising, industrial-scale lead production. The shattered remains of smelting furnaces in Brittany could have supplied the entire ancient world, with isotopic matches proving Celtic lead lined Roman aqueducts and even sealed Egyptian sarcophagi. Perhaps the most poignant finds are the personal ones. A child's grave in Burgundy held a Baltic amber doll wearing a miniature version of a Gaulish torque. A merchant's burial near Budapest contained scales weighted with coins from 8 different tribes, a life's work measuring value across cultures. These aren't just artifacts, they're testaments to a Europe knitted together by commerce centuries before Charlemagne or the Hanseatic League. The legacy survives in plain sight. Modern highways from Lyon to Belgrade often trace ancient Celtic trading paths. The word money itself derives from the Roman mint at Juno Monitor, built atop a captured Celtic trading sanctuary. Even the humble barrel, a Celtic invention, revolutionized Mediterranean wine storage. Their greatest secret wasn't hidden. It was written in the very bones of the continent, in routes that carried more than goods. They carried the future. Beneath the shadow of sacred yew trees, where mistletoe glowed silver in the moonlight, the Celtic healers practiced a medicine so advanced it would take Europe centuries to rediscover. While Roman texts dismissed them as primitive herb gatherers, newly translated medieval manuscripts reveal a startling truth: the Druids weren't just mixing poultices. They were performing precise surgeries, brewing antibiotic potions, and even intervening in neurological disorders with techniques that blur the line between ritual and science. Take the case of trepanation, the delicate art of drilling into the living skull. Roman accounts mocked Celtic head borers, but archaeological evidence tells a different story. In Bavaria, a 2,000-year-old skull shows a neat circular incision along the parietal bone, its edges smoothed by healing. This wasn't the crude hacking of superstition. It was a deliberate procedure likely to relieve pressure from head trauma. Even more astonishing, the patient survived, as bone regrowth proves. Similar finds in Wales and Gaul reveal skulls with bronze plates riveted over fractures, early attempts at neurosurgery that predate Hippocratic methods by generations. The real breakthrough came when researchers cross-referenced these bones with forgotten Irish texts like the Book of the Ogham, a 15th century manuscript preserving older Druidic lore. One passage describes treating battle madness by lifting the bone curtain to let trapped spirits escape, a poetic but accurate depiction of trepanation for intracranial swelling. Another details using spider silk as biodegradable sutures, a technique modern medicine only readopted in the 21st century, but surgery was just one facet of their craft. Herbal compendiums like the Leech Book of Bald contain recipes with measurable antibacterial properties. A salve combining garlic, thyme, and crushed oak gall, ingredients now proven to combat staphylococcus, was applied to wounds with linen bandages boiled in willow bark tea, a natural antiseptic. Clinical trials at Nottingham University found this exact formula inhibited 80% of common medieval pathogens. The most haunting evidence lies in their understanding of the mind. At a Gaulish sanctuary in Gournay-sur-Arronde, archaeologists uncovered lead scrolls detailing treatments for what we'd now call epilepsy or psychosis. Patients were given carefully measured doses of henbane and belladonna hallucinogens in high concentrations, but anticonvulsants in microdoses while lying on magnetite-rich stones now known to alter brainwave patterns. Modern neurologists were stunned to recognize descriptions of aura phases before seizures, recorded centuries before Galen. What makes these discoveries revolutionary isn't just their sophistication, it's their holistic philosophy. Celtic healers saw no divide between body, mind, and environment. A 7th century Welsh text prescribes 3 dawns of walking barefoot through elder groves for melancholy, a practice modern ecotherapy now confirms reduces cortisol levels. Their cancer treatments combined surgery with chanting and exposure to specific musical frequencies, anticipating today's research on sound wave therapy. Yet for all their knowledge, the Druids left no medical textbooks. Their wisdom was encoded in poetry, hidden in bardic tales about gods healing warriors with magical springs or talking stones. Perhaps that's why Rome failed to erase it completely. You can't burn what's memorized in song. Today, as scientists revisit these ancient remedies, we're left wondering how much was lost in the silence between verses, and what secrets might still lie buried in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, waiting to whisper their cures across the centuries. The waves off Brittany's coast still whisper of a fleet that defied Rome, towering oak vessels with leather sails as thick as armor, manned by sailors who navigated not by stars but by the color of the tides. These were the warships of the Veneti, a Celtic tribe whose mastery of the sea was so absolute, Julius Caesar himself called them the most powerful maritime people in Gaul. Yet within a single generation, their revolutionary ships vanished from history, leaving only splintered timbers and a mystery that haunts maritime archaeologists to this day. What made the Veneti so formidable? Their ships were unlike anything the Mediterranean world had seen. Roman accounts describe vessels with hulls of interlocking oak planks, riveted with iron nails as long as a man's forearm. Towering prows were carved with the faces of sea gods, not for decoration, but to split waves during storms. Most revolutionary was their rigging, great sheets of tanned leather stretched across masts, making sails immune to Roman fire arrows that would set flax ablaze. These weren't just boats, they were floating fortresses, some large enough to carry 200 warriors and withstand the fiercest Atlantic gales. Caesar learned their power the hard way during his Gallic campaigns. When he tried to blockade Veneti ports in 56 BC, his galleys designed for calm coastal waters were outmaneuvered by Celtic ships that could pivot on a single oar, exploiting wind and current with eerie precision. The Romans resorted to a desperate tactic, long hooks on poles to slash the Veneti's rigging. It worked, but not before the Celtic sea lords proved their technological supremacy. Then came the silence. After their defeat, the Veneti's shipbuilding knowledge evaporated. No blueprints, no apprentice systems, just abandoned shipyards where tools lay mid-task as if workers vanished mid-stroke. Archaeologists have found only fragments: a rudder post in the Loire estuary, a rusted nail with a unique alloy blend near Vannes, the most haunting clue. A 1st century, a D-Roman ledger mentioning Venetic-style hulls being replicated for Nero's navy, but the designs were later abandoned as unfit for civilized seas. What happened to this naval genius? Some scholars point to Caesar's brutal reprisals, the massacre of Druids who may have guarded shipwright secrets. Others note that the Veneti's ships were too specialized, reliant on oak groves the Romans systematically burned. But the most intriguing theory comes from a medieval Breton text describing iron men who sailed west during the conquest. Could Veneti shipbuilders have fled beyond Rome's reach, taking their knowledge to Ireland or even North America? Modern sonar scans reveal tantalizing hints. A submerged structure off the Isle of Moline matches descriptions of a Veneti dry dock, its timbers deliberately scuttled. Nearby, divers found a slate covered in ship diagrams too advanced for Roman copies. The truth may lie deeper still, buried under centuries of silt and legend, a ghost fleet waiting to be rediscovered, its secrets locked in the salt, warped grain of oak that refused to rot. At first glance, Celtic knots appear as nothing more than beautiful, interwoven designs, endless loops of ribbon with no beginning or end. But look closer and you'll notice something unsettling. These patterns aren't just decorative. They're alive with motion, locked in an eternal dance where every twist and turn holds meaning. From the stone crosses of Iona to the pages of the Book of Kells, these knots were far more than art. They were a language without words, a mathematical riddle, and some believe, a form of spiritual armor against forces beyond our understanding. Take the simplest knot, the triskel, 3 spirals joined at the center. To modern eyes, it's a lovely motif, but medieval Irish texts reveal its true purpose. Woven into a warrior's cloak or etched above a doorway, it was believed to confuse malevolent spirits, trapping them in its endless path. The logic was flawless. If a demon tried to follow the line, it would spin eternally without reaching its target. Even the direction mattered. Clockwise knots allegedly summoned protection, while counterclockwise versions could bind enemies in invisible snares. The mathematics behind these designs are equally staggering. Researchers at Trinity College, Dublin recently laser-scanned knots from the 9th century Book of Armagh, discovering ratios matching the golden mean. Some interlacing patterns encode Pythagorean triples, perfect right-angle triangles centuries before such math reached Europe, the most mind-bending example. A seemingly random knot on the Monaster Boy's high cross contains a recursive fractal pattern, repeating the same sequence at smaller scales ad infinitum. How did artisans without formal mathematics achieve this? The answer might lie in oral traditions. Celtic knotwork followed strict rules passed down through generations of craftsmen. A single error in the weaving could, according to legend, unravel the knot's power. Manuscripts like the 12th century Liber Gabala Iren describe Druids testing apprentices by having them recreate knots from memory after days without sleep. Only those who internalized the sacred geometry could reproduce them flawlessly. But the darkest secrets lie in the knots that don't appear in public art. Excavations at a Scottish crannog revealed a wooden box lined with charred oak strips arranged in a never-before-seen 8-point knot. When researchers recreated it, they noticed something bizarre. Placed near a compass, the design generated a localized magnetic anomaly strong enough to deflect the needle. Was this accidental, or did the Celts understand something about Earth energies we're only now rediscovering? Modern craftsmen who attempt to replicate these knots report strange phenomena. Some describe losing track of time while weaving particularly complex patterns, emerging from concentration hours later with no memory of the work. Others speak of knots that resist being completed, as if the lines themselves push back against the artist's hand. Whether psychological or something more uncanny, one thing is clear: these weren't just drawings. They were conduits humming with an ancient energy we've yet to fully comprehend. Perhaps the most haunting knots are the ones deliberately left unfinished. In the margins of the Lindisfarne Gospels, a half-completed design spirals into blank parchment. Medieval Irish monks wrote that certain knots were meant to be finished by the divine, their open ends an invitation for the sacred to complete the pattern. It's a humbling thought that the Celts saw their art not as creation, but as collaboration with forces beyond human hands. Today, as mathematicians decode their ratios and mystics meditate on their curves, the knots remain what they always were, both door and key, waiting for the right moment to reveal their final secret. The forest trembled under the weight of drumbeats as warriors painted their bodies with swirling patterns of woad, their eyes glinting with something beyond human. Among the Celts, battle wasn't just fought with steel, it was a metamorphosis. Legends speak of elite fighters who could shed their humanity like a cloak, channeling the raw fury of beasts through ancient rituals. These were the berserkers, feared across Europe for their trance-like rages, where men became wolves, bears, or stags in the heat of combat, and the most chilling part. Archaeology suggests it wasn't just myth. Excavations from Gaul to the Scottish Highlands reveal graves where warriors were buried clutching wolf jaws or wrapped in pelts, their bones etched with animal motifs. At Ribeaumont-sur-Ancre in France, a mass grave held headless skeletons adorned with boar tusks, a grisly tribute to the ferocity of these shape-shifting warriors. But the most compelling evidence comes from Denmark, where a 2,000-year-old peat bog yielded a ritual mask of stretched animal hide, its empty eye sockets still radiating primal terror. Forensic analysis showed traces of hallucinogenic herbs fused into the leather, hinting at ceremonies where the line between man and predator blurred beyond recognition. How did they do it? Historical accounts describe nights spent in sweat lodges, breathing in sacred smoke until the world twisted into visions. Poets recited incantations to invoke the spirit of the wolf, while drumbeats mimicked racing heartbeats. By the time battle came, these warriors weren't just fighting. They were surrendering to something older than memory. Roman chroniclers wrote of Celtic foes who moved unnaturally fast, their howls scattering trained soldiers. Even their weapons fed the illusion, swords cast with snarling beast hilts, shields bearing shapes that seemed to writhe in the flicker of torchlight. Yet this wasn't mere theatrics. Modern anthropologists recognize these rituals as a form of extreme neuro-linguistic programming, rewiring the mind to bypass fear and pain. The Celts understood something neuroscience now confirms: belief can override biology. When a warrior truly believed he'd become a wolf, his body followed, flooding with adrenaline, dulling injury, heightening senses to animal sharpness. But there was a price. Some berserkers never fully returned, their minds forever wandering the borderlands between human and beast. Perhaps that's why later Celtic sagas warn of men who ran howling into the woods after battle, never to be seen again except as flickers of shadow between the trees. Beneath the rolling green hills of what is now France and Germany, the earth holds the ruins of a secret the Romans tried desperately to erase: vast Celtic cities that rivaled their own in scale and sophistication. Forget the image of barbarians huddled in forest huts. Aerial surveys and LiDAR imaging have revealed sprawling metropolises like Huneberg and Bibracte, where tens of thousands lived in meticulously planned quarters, their streets laid out in precise grid centuries before Roman engineers set foot in Gaul. These weren't just settlements, they were statements in stone and timber, proving the Celts mastered urban living long before history gave them credit. Take Huenberg in southern Germany, a 6th century BC powerhouse perched high above the Danube. Its reconstructed mud brick walls, an imitation of Mediterranean architecture, once stretched nearly 2 miles, enclosing neighborhoods with specialized workshops for glassmaking, bronze casting, and even minting coins. But the real shock came when archaeologists uncovered something Rome wouldn't achieve for another 500 years. A pressurized water system using hollowed oak pipes feeding public fountains and bathhouses. Even more impressive, the entire city was rebuilt every 25 to 30 years in an exact replica of the original layout, a ritual renewal that preserved sacred geometry down to the inch. Then there's Bibracte, hidden in the forests of Burgundy. Far from a primitive stronghold, this 1st century BC capital boasted sewer channels lined with waterproof lime mortar, multi-story stone and timber homes with underfloor heating, and a central plaza large enough to host 10,000 people. Ground-penetrating radar recently revealed an even bigger surprise. The city's roads followed astronomical alignments, with main thoroughfares pointing to solstice sunrises. This wasn't haphazard construction, it was sacred urban planning where every lane and dwelling served both practical and spiritual purposes. What truly shatters the forest dweller myth is the evidence of social complexity. At Corinth in central France, excavations uncovered a Senate-style circular assembly hall with tiered seating, a proof of democratic debate among Celtic elites. At Manching in Bavaria, over 400 wells were strategically placed to serve distinct districts, their depths adjusted to prevent cross-contamination. Even trade was systematized. Standardized weights and measures found across sites from Bohemia to Britain suggest an interconnected economic network. Roman propaganda dismissed these centers as oppida, a belittling term meaning enclosed places. But modern archaeology tells a different story. At Titelberg in Luxembourg, a Celtic financial hub thrived with a bullion-based economy, its streets lined with shops selling goods from as far away as Egypt. In Austria, the salt mining city of Hallstatt had a hospital district where surgical tools and herbal remedies show advanced healthcare. These were cosmopolitan hubs where artisans, diplomats, and scholars exchanged ideas, places that would feel familiar to any modern urbanite. The most haunting clue to their downfall lies in the vitrified forts of Scotland. These stone walls, fused into glass by intense heat, were long thought to be the result of wartime destruction. But recent experiments show the Celts may have deliberately melted their own citadels, a scorched earth policy to deny Rome the satisfaction of conquest. In the ashes of these once great cities, we find the stubborn pride of a people who'd rather erase their achievements than let them be rewritten by conquerors. Today, as lasers map these lost urban landscapes beneath farmland and forest, we're left to wonder, if Rome hadn't burned the libraries and silenced the Druids, how much more might these cities have taught us about the true breadth of Celtic civilization? Buried beneath riverbanks and tucked into the crevices of ancient stone altars, small sheets of folded lead hold whispers of vengeance so potent they echo across millennia. These are the Defixion's blood-cursed tablets, thin as petals yet heavy with malice, inscribed by Druids and ordinary Celts alike to call upon gods and spirits for retribution. Unlike the grand stone monuments or intricate gold talks, these artifacts reveal a darker, more personal side of Celtic spirituality, where magic wasn't just ritual, it was warfare waged in the shadows. One such tablet, dredged from the River Marne in France, bears a message etched in jagged Celtic script. May the thief who took my cloak lose his eyes to ravens, his tongue to rot, his breath to the goddess Nemain's chokehold. Forensic linguists note the precision of the curses, not generic hexes, but targeted afflictions mirroring the victim's suffering, a stolen cloak the thief would freeze. A swindled farmer, the culprit's crops would wither. The symmetry was deliberate, a cosmic balance enforced by the Otherworld. The mechanics of these curses were as meticulous as their wording. At a sanctuary in Lazak, archaeologists uncovered 23 lead tablets stacked like a dark deck of cards, each pierced with nails, some still twisted from the force of being hammered. This was no metaphor. The Celts believed the act of piercing the metal bound the curse to its target, just as the nail bound the tablet. Some inscriptions even specified the curse would last as long as this lead stays buried, showing an understanding of magic as a tangible, enduring force. What chills modern scholars isn't the violence of the curses, but their legality. In Gaulish society, stealing a neighbor's livestock might land you a fine, but stealing after they'd cursed you, that was suicide. Tablets often included conditional clauses: if X wronged me, then Y, suggesting they served as supernatural contracts admissible in disputes. A tablet from Bath in Britain invokes Sulis, a goddess linked to healing springs, to boil the blood of a man who stole a ring, blending piety with brutality. The most unsettling discoveries come from the tablet's ingredients. Spectral imaging reveals traces of blood, hair, or nail clippings pressed into the lead materials modern witches would recognize as taglocks, physical ties to amplify a curse's reach. Some were folded with venomous herbs like belladonna or wrapped in thorns, turning each tablet into a poisonous time capsule. At Ely in Gloucestershire, a curse targeting a rival trader was found with a tiny bronze figurine of a bound man, his mouth gagged with lead strips. Sympathetic magic wasn't just symbolism, it was surgical precision. Yet for all their fury, these curses carried an odd reverence. Many conclude with phrases like, "by the order of the Morrigan," or "with the justice of Lugos," framing vengeance as divine duty. Even the lead itself was sacred, a metal associated with Saturn and the underworld, chosen not for its malleability but its symbolism as a conduit to darker realms. Today, museums display these tablets behind glass, their curses neutered by time. But in quiet moments, conservators report strange phenomena: sudden temperature drops near certain tablets, or cameras malfunctioning when documenting them. Perhaps it's coincidence, or perhaps, as the Celts believed, some words never lose their power, and these folded slivers of lead still hum with old, unforgotten rage. The Celts didn't track their destinies by the stars alone. They read them in the rustling leaves of sacred trees. Hidden within the fragmented lore of Druids and the surviving Ogham inscriptions lies a forgotten zodiac, one that tied human fates not to distant constellations, but to 13 native trees, each governing a lunar month and radiating its own unique power. This was no simple farmer's almanac. It was a living, breathing system of astrology so precise it wove together time, botany, and cosmic energy into a guide for everything from birth rituals to declaring war. Take the birch, ruler of the first lunar month beginning the day after the winter solstice. To the Celts, this wasn't just a pioneer species, it was the tree of beginnings, its silver bark symbolizing purification and new paths. Children born under its sign were believed to carry its resilience, marked for leadership. Contrast this with the oak, reigning over the summer solstice month, its domain, strength, and endurance. Battles were timed to its phase, while acorns carried in a warrior's pouch were thought to channel the tree's indomitable spirit. The system's sophistication emerges in lesser-known entries like the vine, governing the autumnal equinox, a month of introspection and transition, when legal disputes were settled and marriages negotiated, its winding nature reflecting life's complexities. The real magic lay in the intersections. Each tree's opposite on the lunar wheel balanced its traits, creating a yin-yang dynamic the Druids called the law of mirrored boughs. Hazel, associated with wisdom and poetic inspiration during its August-September month, found its counterpoint in the reed of October, a plant of practical craftsmanship and boundary setting. Together, they embodied the Celtic ideal of harmonizing creativity with structure. Even the seemingly humble blackthorn held profound significance. Its March-April reign was considered the warrior's threshold, a time when young men underwent initiation rites beneath its white blossoms, which bloomed before the leaves emerged, a metaphor for action before contemplation. Evidence of this system surfaces in unexpected places. The Coligny calendar's cryptic notations align with known tree months, while medieval Welsh triads reference the 13 judges of the wood, who settled disputes based on arboreal astrology. A recently deciphered lead tablet from Gaul details a Druid's counsel to plant the apple when the hawthorn rules, suggesting agricultural cycles followed this celestial botany. Even personal adornments carried its mark, torques shaped like rowan branches for protection, or brooches enameled with holly leaves to honor winter-born warriors. Modern attempts to reconstruct the zodiac reveal startling accuracy. Dendrochronologists studying ancient oak growth rings found the Celts' lunar months matched natural sap cycles, while phytochemical analysis shows the 13 trees contain psychoactive or medicinal compounds peaking during their respective months. The yew, governing the death and rebirth month of November, produces its highest concentration of taxine alkaloids used in both poison and visionary rituals precisely when the Druids harvested it. Coincidence? The Celts would say there are no accidents, only patterns waiting to be read. What fascinates scholars most is how the system wove the practical and mystical into one. A farmer didn't just sow crops by the tree calendar, he understood the soil itself resonated differently under each lunar influence. The older moon of March was for building bridges, its wood impervious to water. The willow moon of April guided healing, its bark rich in salicylic acid. This wasn't superstition, it was observed ecology elevated to sacred science. Yet for all its precision, the tree zodiac carried a warning etched into Druidic teaching. No system could override free will. The oak might lend strength, but courage came from choice. The apple tree's month promised love, but only to those willing to nurture it. Perhaps that's why the Romans, who reduced destiny to rigid star signs, so feared the Druids' teachings, because a zodiac rooted in living things acknowledged that fate, like a sapling, could bend without breaking. Today, as we rediscover these connections, we're left to wonder how much wisdom was lost when the sacred groves fell, and what might still grow back if we learn to read the leaves again. The waters around Anglesey churned with Roman warships in 61 AD, their oars cutting through the mist like knives as legionnaires stared at the shore where figures danced in the smoke of burning herbs. This was no ordinary battlefield, it was the spiritual heart of Celtic resistance, the last sanctuary of the Druids, and Rome had come to extinguish it forever. Tacitus's account paints a scene straight from nightmare. Warrior priests clutching torches, their hair wild, hands raised to the sky as women in dark robes darted between the sacred oaks, howling curses that echoed across the strait. To the superstitious Romans, these weren't just enemies, they were something older, something that made hardened soldiers hesitate before stepping onto the beach. Anglesey, or Mona as the Celts called it, was more than an island. For centuries, it had been the Oxford of Druidic knowledge, a place where initiates studied for 20 years to master astronomy, law, and the sacred arts. Its groves were living libraries, each tree's bark carved with Ogham wisdom, its springs whispered to heal or poison with a shift in the wind. But by the 1st century, it had also become a rallying point for anti-Roman rebellion, a fact Governor Suetonius Paulinus knew well when he ordered the invasion. What followed wasn't just a massacre, it was a calculated attack on memory itself. The Roman assault was methodical. First, the warships ballistae launched firepots into the sacred groves, turning oak and yew into towering pyres. Then, legionnaires advanced in tight formation, their shields interlocked against stones hurled from slings, and the screams of the Druids, not pleas for mercy, but chants so potent they made the earth tremble, or so the terrified legionnaires claimed. Tacitus describes women dressed in funeral black, brandishing torches, like the Furies themselves, their eyes rolled back as they prophesied Rome's fall. Archaeology confirms the horror. Mass graves near Lyn Serig Bog hold skeletons with their hands still clasped around ritual staffs, their bones carbonized from the fires. Yet Anglesey's destruction wasn't the end of the story. Hidden beneath the obvious brutality lies a deeper mystery, the Druids' final act of defiance. Roman records mention soldiers collapsing mid-charge, their limbs seizing as if gripped by invisible hands. A lead tablet discovered in Chester curses Paulinus by name, its Ogham script woven with strands of human hair and mistletoe pollen. Most haunting of all are the satellite images showing unnatural circular burns in Anglesey's soil, not random fires, but precise spirals that mirror the paths of the moon. Were the Druids conducting one last ritual as the blades fell? Modern excavations hint at their ingenuity. Beneath the Roman fort built to replace the groves, archaeologists found a network of tunnels lined with quartz crystals, a subterranean sanctuary where the few survivors might have preserved their knowledge. Local legends speak of the teachers who became trees, their spirits fleeing into the remaining oaks. Even the island's name holds a clue. Mona derives from the Celtic word for noble, but also shares roots with the Welsh emwyn, meaning secret. The Romans may have thought they'd won. They cut down the groves, slaughtered the priests, and paved roads over the sacred springs. But walk Anglesey's back lanes today, and you'll still hear it, the whisper of leaves in a language older than Latin, the hum of a chant that refused to die. The Druids understood something Rome never could. You can burn a tree, but you can't kill its roots, and sometimes all it takes is the right season for what was buried to grow again. Your spit in a vial could rewrite history. That's the power of modern genetic research. Unraveling a secret hidden in the veins of millions' Celtic ancestry isn't confined to the misty hills of Scotland or the rocky coasts of Ireland. It pulses through people as far away as Turkey, Spain, and even Iceland, a silent testament to migration so vast they force us to redraw the map of ancient Europe. The latest DNA studies reveal that the Celts weren't just a collection of tribes, they were a genetic wave, leaving traces in places history books never mentioned. Take the quiet villages of Galicia in northern Spain. For centuries, locals told stories of their ancestors arriving from beyond the sea, their bagpipes and spiral-carved stones dismissed as quirks. Then came the genetic testing. When researchers compared the DNA of Galicians to that of Bronze Age Celts from Austria, the markers matched specific mutations in the Y chromosome haplogroup R1b, a signature as distinctive as a fingerprint. Even more astonishing, the same genetic threads appear in the Basque Country, a region long assumed to be isolated from Celtic influence. Suddenly, those ancient legends of seafaring Celts trading along the Atlantic coast don't seem so far-fetched. But the real shock lies eastward. In central Turkey, near the ruins of ancient Gordian, geneticists sampling modern populations found clusters of people carrying a variant of the M269 gene typical of Western Celts, mixed with local Anatolian DNA. How did it get there? The answer might lie in the Galatian Celts, mercenaries hired by Hellenistic kings in the 3rd century BC. Historians knew they'd settled in Anatolia but assumed they'd assimilated. The genes tell a different story. Their descendants still walk those plains today, their DNA preserving a legacy lost to written records. The most unexpected twist comes from Iceland, where a recent study of medieval skeletons upended the island's origin myths. While Norse Vikings founded the settlement, nearly a quarter of the early female settlers carried Celtic mitochondrial DNA, likely from slaves or wives taken from Scotland and Ireland. But here's what chills historians: some of these genetic lines trace directly to pre-Christian Iron Age Celts, suggesting entire families survived the Viking raids and chose to cross the sea rather than perish. Their resilience is written in the bone marrow of modern Icelanders, where Celtic ancestry lingers like a ghost in the gene pool. This genetic detective work doesn't just rewrite history, it corrects it. For decades, scholars debated whether the Celts were a unified culture or just scattered tribes sharing artistic styles. The DNA evidence suggests both are true. From Portugal to Poland, distinct Celtic subgroups carried unique genetic markers, yet all descended from a common ancestor who walked Central Europe around 2500 BC. Their migrations weren't chaotic floods but deliberate currents following river valleys and copper trade routes. The most poignant revelation: Celtic genes didn't vanish, they adapted. In Brittany, where Roman and Frankish conquests tried to erase Celtic identity, DNA shows the local population is still 60% genetically identical to Iron Age Britons. Even in England, where Anglo-Saxon invasions were thought to have replaced the native bloodlines, genetic mapping proves modern Cornish and Cumbrians share 80% of their DNA with pre-Roman Celtic Britons. The conquerors came and went, but the genes endured, tucked safely in the chromosomes of farmers, bakers, and children who never knew the names of their ancestors. So what does this mean for you? If your family hails from anywhere between Dublin and the Danube, there's a good chance you're carrying a piece of this story in your cells. The Celts didn't disappear, they folded into the fabric of Europe, their legacy not just in stone circles and sagas, but in the very blueprint of millions. Next time you see a map of Europe, remember, the borders are new, but the blood is ancient, and it remembers what history forgot. From sacred trees whispering prophecies to warrior queens leading armies, the 25 secrets we've uncovered demolish every lazy stereotype of the Celts as simple barbarians painted in woad. These were astronomers who mapped eclipses centuries before telescopes, surgeons who performed brain operations with bronze tools, and poets who encoded complex mathematics into knotwork. Their curses could bind souls to lead tablets, their chariots were designed for underworld races, and their gold shimmered with warnings we're still learning to read. Far from the uncivilized raiders of Roman propaganda, they built cities with running water when Rome was still a village, tracked time with a calendar more precise than Caesar's, and traded goods from Egypt to Iceland long before globalization existed. Yet for all we've pieced together, the greatest lesson might be how much remains hidden. We'll never hear the Druids' oral teachings firsthand or fully grasp why the Parisii erased themselves from history. The meaning behind certain Ogham carvings still slips through our fingers like mist, and the true purpose of the carnyx's bone-shaking scream may have died with its last player. Every archaeological discovery, from the vitrified forts of Scotland to the bog bodies with their triple deaths, answers one question only to raise 10 more. That's the magic of Celtic history. It refuses to be pinned down, always leaving a shadowed corner where mystery lingers. So tell us, which secret reshaped your understanding the most? Was it the warrior women whose graves archaeologists mislabeled for centuries, the cities buried under modern farms, or the chilling precision of those eclipses predicting stone circles? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's keep unraveling these mysteries together. Because the Celts didn't just leave us artifacts, they left a puzzle that keeps drawing us back, whisper by whisper, into their world. And who knows, maybe the next great revelation is hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone like you to notice.